Hi there, welcome back to the Interchange Book 3 video series. Today we're doing Unit 8, and today we're talking about rather versus prefer, okay? Especially for when we talk about preferences. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so let's look at this situation. A young couple is thinking about their wedding and trying to plan it. However, they can't seem to agree on everything. Or anything, really.
So how many people should we invite? Do you think 200 is enough?
200? Actually, I was thinking about something a little smaller. I'd prefer to invite maybe 20, at most.
Okay. Well, we can discuss that later, I guess. What about the food?
Well, my vote is for steak. You know I love a good steak.
But what about my family? Almost no one eats meat. I'd rather have a vegetarian dish. Anyway, let's keep going. Okay, for dessert, would you prefer to have cupcakes or a cake?
I wouldn't prefer either. You know I don't like sweets.
Right. Okay, so we'll pass on that one for now too.
Well, what about the honeymoon? We can agree on that, right? We said we'd go somewhere in the mountains.
The mountains, we did? It's just that I'd much rather spend time at the beach.
But why would we go to the beach if we're going to buy a house on the beach? Wouldn't you prefer to go somewhere else?
Wait, what? The beach? Don't you remember I told you I'd rather live in an apartment in the city? Ugh, you never listen. Besides, we need the extra money to buy the car.
Hold on. Who said anything about a car? I'd rather have a motorcycle than a car. Plus, why would we need a car if we're only going to have one child?
One kid? You know I'd prefer to have a big family, right?
Dang. We should have talked about this stuff a long time ago, huh?
Yeah, you can say that again.
I think I'd rather just be friends. What about you?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll move my stuff out tomorrow.
Okay, so now after watching the video, we're going to look at the grammar. Now, if you noticed in the conversation between the man and the woman, they were talking about preferences, and they were using the words prefer and rather quite often, okay? So the idea is that prefer and rather are basically the same thing. We use it when we're talking about preferences, okay? Now they had different preferences, very different preferences. So one of them was, he said, I'd prefer to go to the mountains. So he prefers the mountains. And she said, well, I'd rather go to the beach. So she prefers the beach. Okay? Now we're going to look at the difference between rather and prefer. So prefer and rather are the same idea. We use them to talk about preference. Okay? But we can do this in a different way. The grammar is important. So let's look at prefer first. When I use prefer, I can prefer nouns and verbs. So I can prefer things with nouns. I can prefer something, or I can prefer an action with the verb. For example, I can say, I'd prefer pizza. Okay? Someone says, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? I can say, I'd prefer pizza. And I'm using the noun. And that's okay, because I'm using prefer in the noun. Or I could say, with an action, I'd prefer to eat pizza. Okay? So here I'm using the action, right? So I can use both of those, and both of those are okay. Now let's look at rather. So rather is different. Rather I cannot talk about a noun. I cannot rather nouns. I can rather actions though. Okay? So here's an example. I'd rather pizza? No, I can't do that. Pizza's a noun, and I can't use rather with nouns. No, no, no. But I can say this. I'd rather eat pizza. Ding ding. That's okay. That's good, right? Because I'm using rather and I'm using a verb. Okay? But if we look at these, I'd prefer to eat pizza and I'd rather eat pizza. There's something different about them. What's different? Well, look at the verb. After prefer, I'm using the infinitive. So the infinitive, remember, is to and a verb, the base form verb. To and the verb. But if I use rather, what type of verb? That's not the infinitive, right? That's called the base form. So it's just the basic form of the verb. Nothing special. So here's a rule. When I use prefer, I need to use the infinitive. I have to use the infinitive. When I use rather, I use the base form of the verb. Okay? And you cannot mix them. It has to be rather base form, prefer, and infinitive. Alright? So, time to practice. Let's see if you guys can fill the right answers. So, using prefer or rather, where is going to go in these spaces? So for the question, what do you think? Prefer or rather? If you said rather, you're correct. Why? Well, look at the verb, study. Study is the base form of the verb, and I know I use rather for the base form verbs. Let's look at this one. If you said rather, you're also correct. Why? Well, look at the verb. Study is in the base form. It's the negative of the base form, but still it's the base form. So I'd rather not study either. That means I don't want to study Chinese and I don't want to study Japanese, right? The last one. Aha, if you said prefer, you're correct. Why? Look at this verb. That's the infinitive, to, and the verb. So that means I need to use prefer. I'd prefer to learn Korean. Okay? Alright. Now, let's look at this one thing. Now, remember, when I say I'd, that's the contraction for I would. So I'm speaking hypothetically that, well, I'm not studying Chinese right now, and I am not studying Japanese right now, and I'd rather not study either, right? Or again, with prefer, it's the same idea. Hypothetically, right? I'd prefer to learn Korean. So we use this hypothetical grammar a lot when we talk about prefer and rather, because we actually don't do it in this moment. It's more of a hypothetical situation when you prefer something or when you rather do something. Alright, let's look at our next example. Okay, prefer or rather. First one, what do you think? Aha, if you said prefer, you are correct, because look at the verb. To visit is an infinitive. That means I need to use prefer. So, would you prefer to visit Paris or London? Okay. The answer? Aha, prefer. I'd prefer not to visit either. Why prefer? Again, look at this verb, to visit. To visit is an infinitive. It's the negative infinitive, not to visit, right? And again, this means I'd prefer not to visit either. That means I don't want to go to Paris and I don't want to go to London. Last sentence. Aha, rather. Again, if we look at go, that's the base form. So I need to use rather. I'd rather go to Rome. Alright, last example. Okay, prefer or rather? Alright, let's wake up early and go to the beach tomorrow. This person's super excited about that, right? This person, not so much. So we can use short answers to reject, to say no, or like, I don't really want to do that. So we can do it two ways, with prefer and rather. This one, I'd rather not. And this one, I'd prefer not to. Okay? So remember with prefer that we use the infinitive, but we don't have the infinitive completely. We have the first part of the infinitive, and that's really important. In the short answer, when you use prefer, you still need to use the to. You don't need to use the entire verb. For example, I'd prefer not to wake up early. No, not important. I can just say, I'd prefer not to, right? But I still need to use that to. Over here, I just say, I'd rather not. Okay. Alright guys, so I hope this video was helpful learning how to use prefer and rather. The same idea, but we use it in different ways. Prefer, we can use a noun, and prefer, we can talk about actions. Rather, no, we cannot talk about nouns, and we can, yes, talk about verbs. However, the verbs are different. When I use prefer, I have to use the infinitive. When I use rather, I have to use the base form. Okay. So, I hope this was helpful, guys. I hope you learned a lot. Good luck in the future, and thanks for watching.